All right, welcome to The Point of View. This is your favorite current affairs show on television in Ghana. On The Point of View, get the right guests. We choose the right topics, ask the guests relevant questions on issues that matter to you. And we are in our COVID-19 season. We encourage everybody to wear a mask. Now, I'll take my mask off because I'm alone here. All my guests are joining me virtually, so you can see my beautiful smile. Well, it's a conversation that's going to try and tackle some very interesting controversies around COVID-19. We're trying to understand where it came from, what it can do, whether there's anybody behind it, whether it's the end of the world, and whether we should all start running. I have a very interesting panel. When I come back, I'll tell you who they are and how I'm going to approach the show. Stay with us. So, welcome back to The Point of View. So, is COVID-19 created by the Chinese to destroy the world? Was it an experiment gone bad? Or the novel coronavirus, that is? Is this whole pandemic a hoax and we're actually suffering from some sort of radiation occasioned by 5G cell sites? Does coronavirus have a chance in hot climates? Does it kill black people? There's a lot of questions around this. Are the people who believe in vaccines pushing this idea so they can make tons of money from our ailment? Will Africa be the testing ground for whatever vaccine is produced? And will the test kits make you actually sick? These are some of the things streaming around on the internet. So tonight, on a point of view, I'm going to try and tackle these from three very interesting perspectives. So my guests include Dr. John Amuasi. He is with the KCCR. He is the lead for global health and infectious diseases. KCCR is the other institution apart from Noguchi that's doing all the testing. And John is a trained physician, KNUST, and he also went to Minnesota School of Public Health. He has postgraduate degrees and PhDs in too many things to talk about. Dr. John Amuasi is joining us from Kumasi. Doc, welcome to the show. Good to have you.
Thank you, Bernard. It's really a pleasure to join you this evening.
It's great to have you. I also have from the United States of America, he lives in Lexington, Kentucky. He's a cardiac anesthesiologist with interest in several other areas of medicine, but he likes keeping himself informed. He says, Bernard, I'm neither a virologist nor immunologist, but I'm just very curious about the world around me. He's also quite active on social media. He writes poetry. He's also a photographer. Dr. Nana Dadzie Ghansah. Doc is joining me from Kentucky. Doc, great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Bernard.
Super. I also have Bright Simmons, who is really a man of many parts, founder of M Pedigree. But for the purpose of this show, he is a member of the board for the Africa Population Health Research Center, a member of the supervisory board of CARE International. He's also a former commissioner of Lancet Commission on Health in Sub-Saharan Africa. And when he has time, he's an activist with Imani as a vice president. Bright Simmons, great to have you.
Thank you, Bernard.
Super. Let me start with Dean Koontz and his 1981 publication, because that's the first thing that people point to say, ooh, coronavirus is something that somebody prophesied in 1981. So my guys, this book was written in 1981. It's entered the year I was born. And it's titled The Eyes of Darkness. And there's a part of the book that's quite spooky in its predictions. It talks about Wuhan, a Wuhan virus. Yeah, there you see the circle part. And what it will do to the world. And a lot of people are a bit shocked that somebody 39 years ago could accurately predict what he calls a perfect weapon, which afflicts only human beings. Of course, that's not true because it affected a tiger last week. No other living creature can carry it. And like syphilis, Wuhan 400 can't survive outside a living human body for longer than a minute, which means it can't permanently contaminate objects or entire places the way anthrax and other virulent microorganisms can. So who wants to take this one? Was it Dean Koontz being prophetic? Is it something he saw through a time warp? Or is this just a crazy coincidence? Who's going to deal with this?
Bennett, I'll take that.
Okay.
Yeah. As somebody who writes also, one thing about writing is you want to present a story that is very compelling.
Yes.
So you write a story that you research well, you get all your data together before you write it. And so Dean Koontz, being the writer he is, did his research extremely well and was able to paint a quite vivid picture. In the hands of a very good writer, that's not surprising at all.
But why Wuhan and why a coronavirus? I mean, maybe the scientists should tell me coronaviruses are not new, right? So, John, coronaviruses are known. So anybody who has a basic understanding of some biology should be able to predict that a new strains would emerge. Dr. Amuasi?
Exactly so. I mean, coronaviruses have been with us for a long time, and it is known that, coronaviruses would typically jump from animals to human beings. So it's really common knowledge in the science world that if there's going to be any virus that's going to cause trouble to human beings, it's going to come from animals, and most likely it's going to be a coronavirus. But thinking about it, Dean Koontz actually I won't say he got things wrong, but there's so many things that are not really parallel to what's happening right now. And the only thing that's really parallel is maybe the mention of a coronavirus, which, as I've mentioned, is common knowledge, most likely the kind of virus that will cause trouble, not a bacteria, although we know that the plague, caused much more harm than the coronavirus, decimated about 1/3 of the world's population, nowhere close to what coronavirus has done today. And then Wuhan. These are the two things to go right, and the years, somewhat right?
Yeah, but the question is, Doc, to get Wuhan right, to get 2020 right, to get a coronavirus right, I mean, what are the chances of that 38 years ago? That's serious.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, it's a very interesting, you can call it a coincidence, prophecy come true, or whatever. But I'm looking at it in the light of it being part of a conspiracy theory. This is where it totally falls apart. Because if anyone had this kind of a plan, why would they put that out there? That's the first question to ask. So it's a great coincidence, wonderful prophecy, but it just doesn't hold water for conspiracy theory.
And Bernard, if I may add,
yes.
you remember the book 1984 by George Orwell?
Yes.
Look at the world we live in now. Doesn't it look a bit prophetic?
Yeah, but political movements are very cyclical. We know this. So you have dictatorships coming in, and then liberal democracies take over. So you can understand 1984. But to get Wuhan...
Pandemics tend to be cyclical too.
So educate me. So how did he know it will come from Wuhan? And how did he know it would be in 2020, not any other year? Guys.
It could be. It's
but the other point,
Bright, what do you think?
I was just going to say that the other point is that you remember in around 1956, you had the Wuhan Institute of Virology set up. Yeah. And not too long thereafter, research into coronavirus was intensified. So if you were someone that was interested in bioweapons, that whole space, and you wanted to write an interesting thriller, you will definitely be drawn to Wuhan. And that is not the only thing. If you have been following this subject, around 2005, the same institute published a very detailed investigation into SARS coronavirus, not the two, but the one that we've always known, the SARS coronavirus we've always known. And they in fact went ahead to see how DNA from mice could be combined with DNA from bats and the likes of it, to see how these evolutionary patterns, mutations and the like of it will impact potential infectivity and the likes. So if you are someone that is following the discussion, none of this is very strange, right? The idea that viruses mutate, the idea that one mutation can make a virus that was not very infectious, highly infectious or contagious, these are common stuff in science and natural, particularly natural science publications. The problem that I find is that not many people read those type of things. So we're waiting for something to be published in the popular press, on CCTV, on the BBC and the likes, before we pay attention. But if you are like another Ghansah or John, who reads Nature and Science, and they read technical papers, for during lunch, then there's nothing that is strange. So that is the big division. People that read somewhat specialist literature and people that just read popular press.
Okay, let's deal with the biggest one now, 5G. And for that, I'll show you a short clip because there are so many clips around on the coronavirus COVID-19 not being a pandemic at all. Some people actually think it's not caused by something biological. It's actually something radiation connected. So I'm going to show you a shortish video. Then I'll pick comments, and I'll start this round with Bright. So just watch this quick one.
What's really occurring with coronavirus? This is going to be difficult for people to accept, but let me tell you categorically, factually, and scientifically, coronavirus is not the problem. It is questionable whether it is even a contagion in the context of a disease that is spreading from person to person. What we're seeing are symptoms of a virus. What we are not aware of what's causing those symptoms. So this has nothing to do with a biological warfare or any other kind of stuff that you might be hearing swirling around on the internet. What this is our bodies reacting to what is known as radio spectrum radiation or radio frequency radiation. And so I know that sounds bizarre, but let me tell you scientifically what is happening, and then I'll tell you contextually why it's happening, and I'll tell you what we can do about it. So what is occurring globally? I was the head of the largest business unit at Vodafone, their headquarters in Newbury, between 2013 through to 2015. I was privy to a number of the new technologies that were coming down the pipe that was going to be implemented, namely the Internet of Things, and secondly, the 5G technology. I knew a long time ago that 5G was dangerous, but I didn't understand the correlation with the coronavirus, which I now do, and I want to be able to explain that to you. So what is happening? There is a deliberate strategy to roll out 5G, which is the fifth generation internet radio spectrum frequencies that enable mobile phones, smartphones, and all devices to function on a much faster processing ability. And with the introduction of AI and artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things, where all devices will be connected, so whether it's your car, whether it's your phone, whether it's your refrigerator, whether it's your electricity in your house, it's all going to be on a smart grid. Effectively a type of matrix, unfortunately. Sorry to use that term. So what is happening is that this technology has to be rolled out globally. My company that I used to work for, as they're running their largest worldwide business unit, is Vodafone. Vodafone are in partnership with Huawei or Huawei, whatever you call them, a Chinese telecoms company. And they have been rolling out systematic 5G implementation in multiple locations. What's the relevance? The frequency that they're using, and I also ran a telecoms company back in 2010 through to 2013-14, some of you will be aware, that specialized in radio spectrum, this is the ability to take external signals from satellites into buildings. And so that the frequency that you experience in power on your phone is the same in the building as it is outside of the building. When mobile networks were created initially, they thought people will be on the road all the time, hence why they were called mobile phones. But actually what happened is people used their mobile phones in buildings and the signal wasn't strong enough to penetrate buildings. That's called radio spectrum. And they're different megahertz frequencies, etc. So the 5G frequency is a very high frequency, very, very, very high frequency. It is just below the classification of a weapon, and I'll tell you why. The frequency that they're using, which is 10 times faster than 4G, unfortunately, when it comes into connection with human bodies, causes cell poisoning. Cell poisoning. So our bodies try to fight the radiation that is in the form of cell poisoning because of this frequency. It is effectively radiation. And what happens is our bodies kick out the toxicity or toxins with some proteins and some DNA, RNA from our cells in the form of a chemical which is called a virus. So most diseases are excretions from cells that we are trying to pull out of our body or push out of our body. And it will head towards orifices to be excreted or expunged out of our body. So our noses or our mouths. So you can understand the picture I'm painting. So what's happening, sorry for the detail, but this is going to take a bit of time. What is happening is that 5G, the frequency and the power, which is 10 times more powerful than 4G, is reacting adversely with human cells, causing cells in our bodies to be poisoned, toxic, and our natural defense mechanism is pushing out that toxicity in the form of a virus. So what you're seeing is not coronavirus per se, you're seeing cell poisoning manifesting with fluids, chemicals, viruses that the body...
So then this commentator then goes on to say that the first place that Huawei set up the sites for the 5G was Wuhan, and that there are many of the sites in Italy and Spain. So essentially drawing a link between the presence of the 5G sites with the radiation and essentially its killing effect using toxicity and cell poisoning. Okay, since he brings in toxicity and cell poisoning, maybe Bright, what are your thoughts on this 5G theory?
So what it is that you have a fragmented piece of knowledge which each standing on their own can lead you down a particular path. And unless you integrate all of these pieces of knowledge, you get the total understanding that you require in order to make sense of the world. Mm-hmm. Now, some of the pieces of knowledge on which these conspiracies are mounted on are credible pieces of knowledge. So to give you an example, there was a scientist or a physicist called Dr. Bill Curry in the US who was asked to investigate the effect of intense networking. They wanted to do more virtual learning in the US. I think it was in Texas. And he was asked to do a study to figure out if there was a potential health effect. And he did the famous graph, which started this whole speculation. I think it was around 2000, there about the early 2000s, where he claimed that he saw in Petri dishes an effect of RF radiation on cell integrity. Mm-hmm. Now, the problem was obviously that is just how science normally works. Somebody makes a discovery, if other people can't reproduce it, and there's a counter narrative, and over time you get stability, you get an expert consensus. The problem that arises is that process is very tedious. As the people that are with me on this show who are professional researchers will tell you, getting one paper published is a nightmare. And often, if you want to be influential in a specialist community like a community of scientists, you need to do a lot of work. So what happens is that some of these people simply just go to town. Because it's much more easier. You don't have to do all that work, all that research, all that publishing. And because you have some credibility, some credentials, you begin to have a real influence in the way that ordinary people see it. So when this thing was published, other researchers then started to look into it. And what they established was that he was not taking into account the effect of the human skin as a barrier to RF radiation. And the fact that these ultra-high frequency radiation are not that penetrating. On top of that, they're not very ionizing, simply meaning that, let me use the very simple terms, they don't heat up the cells so much as to change them. So that requires a lot of evidence, people pulling it all together. But if you break them apart, let me give another example. There was another researcher in the early 2000s as well who did some work on rabbits and the effect of radio frequency radiation on the eyes of rabbits. And he discovered that at a certain level of intensity, the rabbits get cataract, this popular cause of blindness. And that when you transport, or rather you transmute the same experiment with non-human primates like monkeys, you don't get effects. So somehow the rabbits get it, but the monkeys don't get it. But the more that they studied it, the more they began to find out that body mass is a big problem, because that total amount of energy that is emitted has some correlation with the body mass. So for instance, we talk a lot about the frequency and we talk about the wavelength, but we don't talk about the total energy emission as an example. But if you're a very small animal, it's possible that intense bombardment of radiation, that will have no effect on human beings will have an effect on you. Now, if somebody publishes this paper and somebody who is not really paying attention to broader debates reads it, he goes to town. We've had a lot of this. The biggest piece of the puzzle, when you are thinking of these conspiracies, has come from the fact that, indeed, there are international associations and international standards organizations that do prescribe certain protections in respect of all types of telecom technology, not just 5G. So, for instance, we are told that when you're siting masts, these antenna masts, you should not site them within 10 meters of residential property. Now, if you read that, you obviously must make the inference that there's some potential for harm, right? But that's actually precautionary. They're saying that because, we can never have 100% certainty. So we're saying that because this has some mild effect in some experiments and the rest, let's just be super safe. Somebody can take that document and then immediately say, well, there's harm because they are saying we shouldn't site it so close to buildings. If there was no harm, why not? And it's this disparate piece of evidence that is being brought about. But in terms of a direct response to the actual claims made by the gentleman, 1, 3G compared to 4G is 100-point differential. What do I mean by that? 4G is about 100 times faster than 3G.
Okay. 5G
is only 10 times faster than 4G. The shifts that we are going to see from 4G to 5G has been significantly hyped by an industry that genuinely wants you to buy new devices and wants you to subscribe to new services. The shift that we've already gone through from 3G to 4G was already very substantive. So if there were any significant health risks, you are already living it. So that means, therefore, that it doesn't make sense in a world where maybe 60% of all the radiation you're going to encounter is going to come from natural sources. Even eating a banana exposes you to some radiation because of the potassium in the fruit. If you go through an airport scanner, you get a mild dose of radiation if you are using the X-ray scattering as opposed to millimeter wave or any of these other newer technologies. If you go to do a CT scan, you get like 10 times the exposure that you will get, from natural sources throughout the whole year. So there are a lot of things we do day by day, whether it's in, taking X-rays of our chest or go to a full body CT scan, that already exposes us to hundreds and thousands of times the kind of radiation that mobile phones expose us to.
All right.
The problem is that all of these pieces of information are disparate, and we need to start to integrate them.
Let me take
which requires scientific literacy.
Great. Let me take Dr. John Amuasi. You are a physician and you are a doctor as well. Quick comments on 5G as a cause of COVID-19.
No, I think Bright has it right on point there. And I just want to come at this from the biomedical perspective. Here the presenter, who sounds, very erudite and eloquent and, has a cool, UK accent. This is what tends to convince people rather than the substance itself. But there's a lot of flawed science in there, not only flawed science, but also flawed logic. But let me step back a bit and really put on record that science has not always got it right. If you look back at the history even of X-rays, which were discovered as far back as 1895 by Röntgen, the first people who did the X-rays stated categorically that there was no problem with X-rays, there will be no harmful effects from X-rays, until in 1905 when a California-based X-ray pioneer actually died from exposure to X-rays. Right, and later it was realized that you can have X-ray burn and so on and so forth. So science hasn't always got it right. But Bright was also right on point when he stated that there are organizations and bodies that have been set up to ensure that we don't even come close to the spectrum that will cause any kind of bodily harm. Now, speaking directly to what he said, he talked about a couple of things. He said high radiation. Number one, this is not high radiation in the sense of what will cause you bodily harm. And the focus really is on exposed tissue. But Bright already did justice to that. He mentioned also cell poisoning. Now, what is cell poisoning within the space of exposure to radiation? It's very difficult scientifically to understand what he's talking about.
He says it causes toxicity.
Yeah, exactly. But, you cannot cause toxicity to a cell from exposure to radiation. It would have to be some extraneous living organism which will cause toxicity, or some kind of a physical chemical that would cause toxicity. right? And he talked also about these toxins, and the toxins being excreted from the cell are the virus. Now, scientifically, a virus is not a toxin, okay? A virus is not a toxin, and a virus will not be excreted from a cell as a toxin. Secondly, these radiations, we know at best, when they are harmful, will cause things like cancers and other kinds of diseases. These are within the space of non-communicable diseases. A virus will spread a communicable disease, an infectious disease. So the argument is, if it's caused by 5G, how can it spread from someone who's been in a 5G space to someone who has not been in a 5G space? He may argue that, yes, the person who was in the 5G space got it and is excreting the virus and now spreading it to someone who's not in a 5G space. But then he invokes, China and Italy and so on and so forth. The argument is that we can see a clear relationship between movement of people being really the issue, and even in places where there are no 5G towers, you have this thing happening. So the whole science and the entire logic is really, really flawed, and it needs to be
let me come to Dr. Dadzie, Dr. Ghansah. You say some of your friends who are even in the sciences seem to believe in this 5G thing. Just your quick thoughts on how come it's gained so much traction in the social media space, because when I just search on my WhatsApp, page, the number of messages I receive on 5G from people, some of who have PhDs, is just shocking. What are your thoughts on that?
Bernard, I honestly think it's people just don't learn anymore. People don't read anymore. People just want to watch short YouTube videos and be done with it. How can you honestly think that waves can squeeze viruses out of human bodies? That is just, I don't even know what word to use so I wouldn't be politically incorrect. Honestly, if you did any amount of science in school, you know what a virus is. It's a string of RNA or DNA. They're not even organisms, they are things found in the environment, and they can infect us and cause disease. They are not squeezed out of us by toxins. It's just stupid. And people just need to learn. People just need to read. It's that simple. And if you read and you read proper stuff, not kitsch, and if you just don't watch short YouTube chat videos, you won't believe stuff like this. We all learned this in secondary school.
Okay,
what viruses are, what bacteria are. We know they are not squeezed out as toxins.
So you are very dismissive of these things, but I think Bright tells us that there's a reason for this, in the sense that some of the knowledge is incomplete, and because of the complexity, people run off with one side. So in a sense, he's saying that for every conspiracy theory, there is some bit of truth that may have been distorted. But you are not that tolerant.
Bernard, you are telling me there's a new 5G theory of viral genesis, right? You are telling me 5G is able to create viruses out of human bodies. Come on.
No, but that's just one. The other view on the 5G, the other view on the 5G is that, I heard Pastor Chris say people are asked to stay home so that they can install the 5G sites while they are locked inside. So he was asking why Abuja and Lagos. So some people feel it's not just the question of 5G causing corona. There's another view There's another view that the whole corona is a hoax that people want to use to gain footing in installing 5G sites. That's another strand of the theory.
Bernard, you know what? You know why we'll keep having pandemics in this world?
You seem frustrated.
Yes, I am. Because we're going to have a pandemic again. Yes. Because people just don't want to accept what causes these things. Right? We're going to have a pandemic again, believe me. Okay. And until people realize how important it is to understand how these things come about, we are going to be looking at another virus spilling over and causing another pandemic in a few years and killing millions of people.
All right. Guys, I'll take a short break. When I come back, we will look at the issue of vaccines, because there's a whole body of controversy around Bill Gates. Somebody put something together that says he just wants to expand his money making through making of vaccines, and the fact that he was able to predict and model the pandemic shows that there's something up his sleeve. Then there's the video of two French scientists on TV asking for the vaccines to be tested in Africa. which makes Africans more suspicious of the whole thing. And then there are a few other things. So we'll be right back. This is the point of view. We're trying to crack some of the mysteries around COVID-19 and the novel coronavirus. Stay with us. Welcome back to the point of view. Today's edition is trying to get to the bottom of some of the theories around cause of COVID-19. Dean Koontz predicted this in his book. And indeed, whilst we were on air, somebody sent me another book, which is like a prophecy of the end time, which also said that in and around 2020, there would be a virus which causes severe pneumonia-like symptoms, killing many people. And just as suddenly as it came, it will disappear the same way. So yeah, that's the one. But my guests, including Dr. Dadzie Ghansah, who's also a writer, says that a great writer will be able to predict this. And he also has other views on this. He is a cardiac anesthesiologist with interest in several areas of medicine. He's joined me from Kentucky, Lexington. Bryce Simmons is a member of the board of the Africa Population Health Research Center, member of the supervisory board of Care International, former commissioner, Lancet Commission on Health. He's also the founder of Pedigree, and he's explained why some of these theories tend to evolve. And we have Dr. John Amuasi, who's from the Global Health and Infectious Disease Center, KCCR, a lecturer and a physician. I need to say that 2 of the 3 went to Presec, just for those who care to know. And apparently, Dr. Ghansah also did his A-levels at Presec. So we thank God for the Christian training at Presec. Now, there's another one that I won't play a video, but that's Bill Gates. So I've seen people get very angry with Trevor Noah for even daring to interview Bill Gates about COVID-19. And there are 3 possible things. They say, number 1, in 2015, his speech was too eerily predictive. Then there was this group that modeled a pandemic end of 2019, like a month or October 2019. They modeled exact scenario that we're seeing in the world today. Then they talk about Bill Gates moving away from Microsoft, investing a lot in vaccines. He gave a speech where he said the world has too many people and that we need to manage the world's population. If we do well with vaccines and contraceptives, we can control that. People say he's up to no good when it comes to this whole health conversation. Now, I know that both Dr. Amuasi and Bright, the bodies you work with respect Bill Gates a lot. So I don't know what you make of this view by people that Bill Gates knows too much. He probably has something to do with coronavirus. Who's going to go first on this one?
I'll take it, Bennett.
Okay.
First, we need to learn a term. It's called zoonotic spillover. Right? It's very, very important we do. The point of the matter is there are viruses in mammals in the wild that have the possibility to spill over to humans, right? And when they spill over to humans, they have the ability to cause a lot of damage.
Okay.
The case in point is Ebola. Case in point is COVID-19. Case in point is the Marburg, right? Mm-hmm. These viruses are unknown to our bodies. So when we get them, we have no ability to mount an immune reaction.
Okay.
And if, unfortunately, they are respiratory, like we are seeing now, then when you cough, the next person gets that, right? And that's what a lot of people don't seem to realize. Why is it happening so often? It's because we are invading the habitats of a lot of animals. The biggest culprit in all of this is the bat. The bat has about 60 plus viruses in it, and we don't want any of them. So as we encroach into their habitats, as we farm more, build more towns, build more roads, we are encroaching into the habitats of these wild animals. And as we come into contact with the carcasses and their fluids and their blood, we are getting these viruses. So it's not a matter of Bill Gates making this in a lab. It's a matter of human behavior. And that tells you that unless that human behavior changes, unless we set up systems to check this, we are going to be seeing more and more of them. there are hotspots in the world where you have a lot of biodiversity. So you take Brazil, you take Southern Asia, where China is, and you take the area around the Congo, right? These are the hotspots. The more you go into the forest, the more of these viruses you are going to meet. And believe me, they are not nice. Right?
So the more our taste for exotic meat exposes us to zoonotic spillover, which is what you call it.
Exactly. Right? In 2002, a group of Hong Kong researchers went to one of the wet markets in China. They wrote a paper just before SARS broke out. There was animal upon animal upon animal, one set of fluids flowing into the other, right? So you can imagine the amount of viruses that are mixing up there in those markets, right? So that is the danger here. And that's the danger we face when we let ourselves be, pushed away from concentrating on that by these conspiracy theories.
Okay,
right.
Let me ask Bright about. Some people think that anybody who has an interest in vaccines, the more pandemics you have, the more money they make. So they don't trust Mr. Gates in that front.
So like I started off with earlier on, it's about fragments of knowledge and how we integrate them. It's easier to acquire a fragment of knowledge than to integrate knowledge. Knowledge integration is an extremely difficult task, and because sometimes pieces of knowledge contradict each other and it requires further research, synthesis, etc. It's very hard work. If you take Mr. Bill Gates, the concerns that people have about his work arises from a very, rational basis, which is that private individuals are increasingly very powerful because they have a lot of money. And because they have a lot of money, we've not seen historically wealth being disassociated from political power to such an extent. The Fords, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, who started this trend, also had the same conspiracy theories about them. There are extant conspiracy theories about the Rothschild family, for instance, who people believe have caused multiple wars and have done all manner of things, most of which is probably not true. In the case of Mr. Gates, he's taken over from another billionaire who people have a lot of concerns about because he's a private individual who has a lot of access to governments and is very powerful, and that is Mr. George Soros. So a lot of the Soros conspiracies have been transferred to Mr. Gates. And the reason is quite simple. He runs a private foundation, but that private foundation is beginning increasingly to influence policy. So the way we do things as governments, as individual NGOs and the likes, are heavily influenced by powerful foundations, typically founded by young visionaries whose history of extremely competitive business makes some people very concerned about their overall ambition. So if you know Zuckerberg, for instance, you know the history of how he came to found Facebook. Of course, when you hear of the Chai Zuckerberg Foundation, you're going to wonder, is he a completely different person? We knew him as a very competitive businessman who wanted to take over the world. Why is he not going to do the same through his philanthropy? The problem that arises is that this is legitimate debate, which you need to very carefully and systematically try to analyze. The problem is people then take that and then they jump to the next point. So one of the areas that he expressed concern around his support for vaccines is this issue around population control. And Bill Gates has made the argument that if you reduce child mortality, if fewer children die, the mother saves more children, or rather the mother loses less children, they will give birth to less, because a lot of the overpopulation comes from compensatory childbearing, where you give birth to more than you need because some will die. And his argument has been that the more we suppress child mortality, the fewer people will give birth. The problem is that you need to interpret this in a very broad context of the whole K and L dynamics around population. There's a lot of complexity there. It's much easier to take that and say, look, this is somebody who has expressed interest in control of global population. Why is he supporting vaccines? Well, in actual fact, it contradicts, because what has happened in Africa is that over the last 30 years, child mortality has dropped by almost 60%. Population hasn't dropped. We've actually continued to grow, and you're now in a decade and a half, maybe 1 in every 3 child under 5 will be African. So all of that is very complicated, right? You have to integrate this piece of knowledge from here, take it from here, and interpret in the light of this experience. And my argument is that work is much harder than to take a piece of fragment and move with it. The second point is that it's also much easier if you are an expert of some means, of some merit, of some reputation. You don't have to be an expert in a particular area, but let's say you're a doctor, right? And it's much harder to gain influence with people like Dr. Ghansah and Dr. Amuasi. It's much easier to go on Facebook and get influence there. So it's very rational human behavior that we are seeing here.
I see. But John, Dr. Amuasi, should we not be concerned about somebody's business interest being in vaccines and also being some sort of policy influencer for WHO, UN, and things like this? Because if the person is benefiting financially from the production or sale of vaccines, then some people could think that he will tilt policy to essentially create spaces for his business ambition to thrive.
No, I think you ask a really good question, but to be totally fair to Mr. Gates, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, or the foundation side of things, is your classic not-for-profit kind of entity, and the activities they engage in cannot, by their very structure, in any way inure to financial benefit directly to Mr. Gates. Of course, it will increase his popularity, his clout, his influence, but these cannot be tied to financial gain or an increase in his share price and this kind of thing. And there's enough evidence for you to look at to see whether is he tied to any research companies, is he tied to any for-profit pharmaceutical firms and this kind of thing. But what people are really concerned about, and what tickles the mind, is the statements he made, sort of very eerie and very predictive. But if you live in the world in which I live, it's not strange at all. Not strange at all. I can tell you that we had predicted, a couple of colleagues with whom I work internationally, that there was going to be an outbreak like this, exactly like this. I can tell you that in 2018, when the WHO put together the R&D blueprint, when the Ebola was really, getting rough or sort of getting on the low side, the statement was made very clearly that we need to be ready for a new global pandemic that will cause blah, blah, blah. These were words of the WHO. You can go to the website and they're there. Would you also say that the WHO in itself predicted this and has brought it upon the world and the suffering in this way? I can tell you.
Let me have to reinforce that point.
Yeah. Absolutely, Bright. I just want to make one more point there. There is also some work that I've been doing with colleagues at the International Severe Respiratory Illness Consortium, and I can tell you, we had a protocol ready, for severe acute respiratory illnesses and the clinical characterization thereof. Because it was very clear to all of us scientists that the next pandemic most likely would be a severe acute respiratory illness, which would cause pneumonias and would spread very quickly, and nobody would really understand how this works. So we had a protocol and everything ready for such a disease. We were actually a bit surprised. It came upon us quicker than we had anticipated. So this protocol was there. We just repurposed it for COVID-19 specifically. Would someone say, if someone got a hold of this protocol, looked at the dates, and then some smart person just wrote, well, a bunch of people had a meeting in London and came up with a protocol for severe acute respiratory illness. This is a clear indication that they knew this was coming and they were ready for it to do research. Sounds great. The logic is almost flawless, but it's just wrong, unfortunately. Sorry,
right. Let me make a very quick point there.
Yes.
So when you go to 37, the hospital in central Accra, near the presidential complex, you will find out that we have a colony of bats there.
Yeah.
That colony of bats has been well studied, and they have some viruses like Lysa virus and Henipa viruses and the like. Now we know that the military, until recently, I think they got better advice, was trying to alter the colony. They were trying to cut trees and shoot things and the rest of it. It takes very little understanding of zoonotic, movements and spillovers, as has been described, for you to suspect that if those types of viruses weren't as tame as they were, and there are some of these beta coronaviruses that are much more fearsome, we could have an infection in Ghana. Now, it's not that difficult for somebody looking at that situation to create a model that will tell you how that infection will happen and how it will spread. And then they can even add an interesting twist. is very close to the military complex. And the behavior of the military in such a situation could also then be part of the modeling. And somebody might say, well, it could even lead to a potential revolution because they get a disease and they blame somebody else and do this. And you can do so many of that stuff. It's not that difficult.
Okay.
Bennett, and like John and Bright have said, anybody who has immersed himself in this literature has known this was going to happen. And talking about that simulation exercise that the Gates Foundation did with Johns Hopkins, the US government did a simulation also earlier in 2019. That simulation was a respiratory virus that spills from China and comes over to the US in Chicago. The guy who comes from Chicago has a son who goes to a concert and gives it to everybody at the concert. The simulation was run by Health and Human Services of the United States government from January of 2019 to August. And all the predictions they made, all the problems they said would happen are playing out as we speak.
Okay.
One last point, one very last quick point.
Okay.
There is an ongoing surveillance program in Ghana around one major scenario. So let me tell you that scenario.
Okay.
A lot of Ghanaian pilgrims go to the Middle East, particularly Mecca. Very few Shia in this region.
Yes.
When they do, so two things are interesting there. In the Shia world, which is more a Nigerian issue, Qom is currently the epicenter for SARS infection in Iran. You know that. That's the holiest cities of Shiites worldwide. If you go to Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia is currently the most endemic region for MERS.
Yes.
A disease that is 10 times the virulence of SARS-CoV-2. Now, the problem that has arisen is that a lot of the pilgrims, when they came back, were not being tested until few people decided that, look, let's start studying to see whether they are bringing MERS in. Now, all the studies so far have shown that they are not. But if in a few years to come, we have a huge MERS problem, the real issue will not necessarily be that these spillovers are surprising or whatever. It will be because people ignore researchers. Policymakers themselves don't even read this stuff.
Okay.
And then the ordinary Ghanaian no longer reads literature except literature for entertainment.
Okay, let me give you this one that I know you agree with me. So there's a lot of Afro-skepticism about vaccines. We know that northern Nigeria, for example, we've struggled with polio because they believe that there's a Western agenda to destroy them and to limit their numbers. Now you have two French scientists on television 2 weeks ago literally say that we should try the COVID-19 vaccine in Africa. Now, clearly that supports the skepticism, does it not? Who's going to deal with that? Why would who deal with that?
Yes. This vaccine thing is really, really dear to my heart, because this is the point at which COVID-19 goes, for me, beyond being just an infection or a disease to an entire phenomenon, right? Because it's really entering into a whole spectrum there. And it's a bit sad because it looks like in Ghana and Africa, we will be forgetting our history. Now, just to take a step back and look at vaccination in itself, right from Edward Jenner and the work that he did in the late 18th century, and then through to the victory against smallpox, which Edward Jenner started in 1980 by the WHO. The impact this has had in the world. You should just look at the graphs of polio and measles in Ghana and the sheer impact of our national immunization days. And I use this for teaching when I'm teaching medical students and public health students, just to show the impact that vaccines have had on the world in terms of improving health. So fundamentally, the benefit that Africa has gained from vaccines is incalculable. And this is not just health benefits. We're talking of economic, massive...
No, but John, the argument is not that vaccines are bad. The argument is why the fact that we are guinea pigs who are used to try out the vaccines inordinately. So
no, I guess I was trying to develop a point here just to bring you from that space of vaccination into where we are right now. Now, with these French scientists, what they were talking about, let me just put it on record here that I absolutely condemn those statements that they made, because their person and the context in which they made them made it completely inappropriate for them to do so. But I must also, at risk of being misunderstood as a scientist, also deconstruct their statement And if I look at it from a scientific lens, I have to be totally honest with you, I'm not so perturbed, all right? Because if you listen to the entire interview, you realize that they were having a discussion about a vaccination, BCG vaccination, which is for tuberculosis, actually beginning to take place in Europe right now. And they then went on and said, well, if we were doing it in Europe, isn't it even more important that we should do this in Africa, where the exposures might be much higher and blah, 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 blah. So they were so immersed in their science, they forgot that, look, you're on TV, you are engaging with the public, you are engaging with society. So, and you forget that you are two white French males talking about the entire Africa. You really shouldn't be doing that. So if you look at it devoid of the circumstances, situation, scientifically, what they were saying, I mean, every scientist's mind is always running. What can we possibly do?
Well, Nana Dadzie, what do you think? Because, John, let me catch you. Nana Dadzie, I know you've written quite extensively about this on your Facebook page. Was it just a slip, or does this not reinforce the skepticism?
Let's take the background here. The BCG was made in 1921.
Yeah.
Treat tuberculosis. It's been used extensively in Africa. Even as we speak, every Ghanaian child that is born is injected with BCG. I got it as a child myself. You got it too, Bennett. Shortly after it was put in use, they realized that it protected these kids from other diseases. And they looked into it, and they called it trained immunity. So you don't just get protected from tuberculosis, but it protects you from a whole bunch of other problems. And so it's an advantage this vaccine has always had. When COVID-19 broke out, certain people looked at the map of the spread of the disease, and they sort of realized the correlation between the spread and the places where they still had an active BCG vaccination. And so they thought, could it be that this BCG thing was protective? So actually, some guys in New York did a paper, and they found great correlation, but very little causality there. So these French scientists were discussing this BCG vaccine in that sense. And they were talking about the fact that Australia and Netherlands were doing a study. So then this other guy says, why don't we include Africa? And like John said, these are scientists talking. And at that very point, you realize that he didn't think very well about what he was saying. Because how do you test the vaccine in Africa against the disease when this vaccine is already in use? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think what caused the outrage was linking it to the HIV study in prostitutes that he purports provides ground for some kind of ethical, lowering of the ethical standards. Because if you do that connection, you say, look, we did it in prostitutes. Why not go and do it, with these black people? Yeah. Naturally, you're going to, trigger a storm. The second thing that I think is also important is that we have an intellectual property regime in the world which gravely, doesn't help Africans, in the sense that the majority of these public health financing of vaccines, so for instance, if they have international organizations, NGOs, international NGOs and the rest, that come up with this research that eventually leads to commercial products, all the beneficiaries, the collateral beneficiaries, are European and American, a few Asians. So there's a time for us to start to ask, from a global commons point of view, if the UN, if international NGOs, if all of people are funding public health research, how do African health businesses, African health innovators, African health entrepreneurs begin to benefit from some of these biotech advances? Let's not kid ourselves. Look at the patent filings for biotech. Look at the published papers in biotech. An insignificant proportion comes from Africa, and it's owned in Africa. So people have a concern that the IP dimension of these matters are not being well addressed. The problem is what I started in the beginning. You take that piece of knowledge or that very legitimate discussion, and then you throw it somewhere else, entirely somewhere. And now you say, look, there is a wholesale depopulation agenda in Africa. Who wants to depopulate Africa if they also want to exploit Africa? It doesn't add up. But the point is that there are legitimate debates.
Okay. Now, and for me, the worrying thing right now is the impact this is having. I happen to be bilingual, so I foray into the French social media stuff that's going on, and I can tell you what's going on in the francophone world in Africa around vaccination is deeply disturbing. I mean, you've heard of what happened in Cote d'Ivoire and Ivory Coast, and I've listened to the 13-minute YouTube rant by an Ivorian nurse in the US, speaking so confidently, eloquently, and emphatically in your classic Ivorian accent French, telling people that there are no testing centers in the US, no testing centers in Italy. Why should there be a COVID-19 testing center in Cote d'Ivoire, and then linking it to vaccination and saying we must say no to vaccination? I think I'm really disturbed about the potential implications it could have for us, because we're already at the tail end of any potential benefits. And we are now actively rejecting those potential benefits should they come. And we have people who should know better fueling this. Unfortunately, our sports celebrities are also taking this up and are pushing it. I don't know how we could even go about reversing. So I want to tell you that what's happening in Francophone Africa has not yet hit Anglophone Africa. When it does, we are, I don't know, in deep something.
All right, guys.
John, Bernard, real quick.
Yes.
We kind of need to look at the other side of the issue here. We need to differentiate between testing drugs and testing vaccines. And I think the problem is how the West pharmaceutical companies have behaved when they tested drugs in Africa. The issue in northern Nigeria was caused by Pfizer testing out one of the antibiotics on kids with meningitis, where a certain number of children died, and the accusation was they knew the new antibiotic was not working, and they didn't flip them over to the old one that worked. We had the problem in, I think it was Kenya, where they were testing HIV drugs without good consent. We had the problem in Ivory Coast, where they were testing HIV drugs, and they paused it for 12 weeks for certain of the Ivorians. There are several reports of them coming to Africa and doing studies where they give people placebo, that means just a sugar pill, and then giving another group of people the antibiotic. So it's created that mistrust. But drug studies are very different from vaccine studies. And unfortunately, that mistrust is seeping over to the other side.
All right.
And what those French scientists said, it's very bad. Because like John said, it's already undermined any efforts we could make.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. I've been speaking.
Can I make one last point? I think
10 seconds.
Conspiracies really are about power. A lot of people feel increasingly impotent in a world that is too complex to make sense of, too complex, way beyond their capacity to comprehend, and they don't feel as if they can impact anything. Believing the conspiracy empowers you. It makes you feel that, look, we can rebel against these massive forces that are arrayed against us. And that is where we must go to if we're looking for solutions to what we believe is either fake news or conspiracies.
Right. Thank you. My guests have been Dr. Nanadozie Ghansah. He's a Ghanaian cardiac anesthesiologist based in Lexington, Kentucky, trained in infanticide between 1979 and 1984, did his A-levels at Presec. That's for Asankome's knowledge. Bright Simmons, who's a member of the board, Africa Population Health Research Center, Supervisory Board, Care International, former Commissioner, Lancet Commission on Health in Sub-Saharan Africa, founding member or founder of Degree. And he's a global, I don't even know where he is. I don't know whether he's in Ghana or he's in Kuwait. I don't know where he is. And then John
There's a sign.
Yes, of course, Bright is my colleague from secondary school as well. Dr. John Amuasi, Global Health and Infectious Disease Research Group, KCCR, doing great work. Doc, thank you for your sacrifices. KCCR, coming up with those tests. A lecturer, Global Health Department, School of Public Health, KNUST, a trained physician. Also my senior from primary school and secondary school as well. Thank you for watching. Please, this will be available on YouTube for you to watch again. And stay safe, Kwabuche boy, because Corona is bad in Kentucky.
Did you live in Kentucky?
I'll see you guys.
Thanks, Bernard.
I'll see you guys later. Thank you. Thank you for being on the show. And let me remind our viewers again, before you go out, you need to mask up so you limit your chances of transmitting an infection. I'll see you on Monday with another fantastic show. This has been The Point of View. Stay with CTTV. Bye-bye. Hi guys, I hope you enjoyed this video on CTTV's YouTube channel. Subscribe for more videos on The Point of View. My name is Bernard Avle. Thank you.
The Point of View with Bernard Avle, Monday and Wednesday nights, only on CTTV.